In the middle of a conversation about Nazi Germany's drug-fueled war machine, journalist Norman Ohler paused. He leaned slightly across the table, eyes steady. I don't think we've been told the full truth about Hitler's death. Joe Rogan froze. The air shifted. This wasn't a throwaway comment. This wasn't another guest chasing clout or spinning a conspiracy. This was Norman Ohler, an investigative journalist, author of the international bestseller Blitzed, Drugs in Nazi Germany, and a man known for digging where others don't. You could feel it in the silence that followed. The studio lights hummed. Joe blinked. Then said what everyone watching was already thinking. Wait, are you saying Hitler didn't die in the bunker? Ohler didn't smirk. He didn't wink. He simply said, I'm saying we may have closed that case too quickly. And just like that, the most infamous death of the 20th century was back under the spotlight. When Norman Ohler sat down with Joe Rogan, most fans expected a deep dive into Nazi Germany's drug culture. His book Blitzed had made international waves by exposing just how addicted Hitler and his regime were to methamphetamine, opioids, and performance-enhancing drugs. But about halfway through, the tone changed. Ohler wasn't just talking about addiction. He was unraveling something else. A thread in the official story that didn't quite hold. He talked about Pervitin, Nazi Germany's favorite meth pill, handed out like candy to soldiers. Over 35 million tablets distributed in a single campaign. Hitler himself was shot up with daily injections of opioids and stimulants by his personal physician, Dr. Theodor Morell. Ohler said Hitler wasn't just drugged. He was chemically deluded, intoxicated by artificial euphoria, detached from military reality, so far removed from logic that surrender never seemed like an option, even as Berlin fell apart. And that's when Ohler said the thing that made Rogan lean in again. That's why it's hard for some people to believe he killed himself. He was too euphoric for such a choice. Let's go back to what we've all been told. April 30th, 1945. As Soviet forces close in on Berlin, Adolf Hitler retreats into his Führer bunker. He and Eva Braun, his longtime companion, swallow cyanide. Hitler adds a gunshot to the head for certainty. Loyal aides wrap the bodies, carry them upstairs, douse them in fuel, set them ablaze, and bury what remains in a shallow bomb crater. Case closed, right? Except, not quite. Ohler pointed out something chilling. For the most important death of the 20th century, the death of Adolf Hitler, we have no body, no photographs, no independently verified autopsy. Just the word of a few inner-circle loyalists, many of whom were interrogated under Soviet pressure. And the Soviets? They didn't help clear things up. For years, they kept changing their story. First, they claimed Hitler died in the bunker. Then Stalin hinted he might have escaped. Later, the Soviets said they had remains, a piece of skull and some dental fragments, but never allowed international verification. In 2009, an American team tested that skull fragment. It belonged to a woman under 40. Eva Braun, maybe? But not Hitler. So now the question becomes, if the remains weren't his, then whose were they? And why, for decades, did the world just accept a version of events built on such shaky ground? The longer Ohler talked, the more the conversation shifted from what if to what the hell. He brought up rat lines, real, documented escape routes that helped high-ranking Nazis flee Europe after the war, through the Vatican, through sympathetic networks in Spain and Italy, across the Atlantic to Argentina, Chile, Brazil, Paraguay. Not a theory, a fact. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust, found in Argentina in 1960. Josef Mengele, the angel of death from Auschwitz, lived freely in South America for decades. So if those men escaped, why not Hitler? Ohler didn't say he had proof, but he had evidence. And more importantly, he had questions no one wanted to ask. He pulled out declassified FBI documents, memos from the 1940s and 50s. They detailed reports of Hitler sightings in South America. One described a man in Argentina who looked remarkably like him, older, quieter, protected by bodyguards. The memo said, "Source considered reliable." The conclusion? No conclusive evidence. Case closed. Joe blinked. If they were sure he was dead, he asked, why were they even entertaining this stuff in the 1950s? Exactly.
Ohler didn't stop at old archives. He traveled to Argentina, to Chile, to the Andes, walking the trails himself. In one remote Patagonian village, he met an old man known only as Esteban. Through a translator, Esteban told a strange story about his father working on a private estate in the 1950s. The owner? A tall German man. One arm didn't work, walked with a limp, no name, but everyone feared him. Esteban's father was told never to approach the house, just drop supplies at a side door and leave. The staff referred to the man as the ghost. In another mountain village, Ohler found the ruins of a stone house locals called La Casa del Alemán, the German's house. Villagers said it once belonged to a powerful man. He came, he left. No one asked questions. No photographs, no names. Just memories, whispers, shadows. I'm not saying it was Hitler, Ohler told Joe, but the world built escape hatches, and if anyone had the means, motive, and fanatical loyalists to use them, it was him. Back in the studio, Rogan sat quietly. The energy was different now, heavier. This wasn't a conspiracy theory. This wasn't a clickbait headline. It was a challenge. Even if it's just 1% possible, Joe said slowly, that changes everything we thought we knew. And he's right. If there's even a sliver of a chance that the death of Adolf Hitler, the closure point of World War II, wasn't what we've been told, then what else did we miss? What else did we choose not to look at? Because as Ohler explained, we ended the most destructive war in history on a set of assumptions, not on proof. That's the line that stopped the room cold. Let's be clear, Ohler isn't saying Hitler escaped. He's saying the evidence we accepted as final might not be enough. And that's not just about Hitler. It's about truth. It's about how we decide a story is over. History is supposed to be built on facts, but sometimes it's built on fear, on convenience, on the desperate human need to move on. Maybe Hitler died in that bunker. Maybe the Soviets really did find his remains. But maybe, just maybe, we buried that story too fast. Maybe we were so desperate for closure that we accepted second-hand accounts, conflicting testimonies, and unverified evidence. History isn't made of certainties, Ohler told Joe. It's made of stories, pieced together from fragments, some real, some repeated, some convenient.
By the end of the episode, something had changed.
Ohler wasn't talking like a historian anymore. He was talking like a man who had seen too many doors closed before the room was even searched. It's time, he said, to tell everything. Not because he had the answer, but because we've stopped asking the question. That's what makes this conversation different. It's not about sensationalism. It's about curiosity. It's about responsibility. It's about making sure the stories we teach are true. Because if we can't be sure about how Hitler died, then we need to ask, what else have we accepted too easily? The thing about secrets is that they don't always hide in locked rooms or encrypted files. Sometimes they hide in plain sight, buried beneath decades of assumptions, dressed up as facts, protected not by conspiracy, but by comfort. Because closure is easy. Mystery isn't. And Hitler's death, it offered the world the kind of closure it desperately needed. Think about it. By May 1945, over 70 million people were dead. Cities reduced to ash. Families shattered. Humanity on the brink of collapse. People needed to believe that the man who started it all, who personified evil, had paid the price. That belief became part of the healing. He died, the nightmare ended. We taught that in schools. We engraved it in textbooks. We made it a chapter that didn't need revision. But as Ohler points out, maybe it should have been revised. Maybe the neatness of the story was its biggest red flag. Why were Soviet reports about Hitler's death so inconsistent? Why was there no independent autopsy? Why were crucial documents sealed for decades? Why did world leaders, Eisenhower included, refuse to confirm that Hitler was really dead? And why did U.S. intelligence continue investigating leads well into the 1950s? No one's saying it proves anything, but it begs the one question that history hates. What if we were wrong? And if the answer is maybe, then the next question is, why didn't we look harder? In a world drowning in disinformation, most people fear lies. But Norman Ohler fears something else. Apathy. That quiet shrug of the shoulders. The dismissive, yeah, but that's old news. The complacency that says, we already know how it ends. That's how bad history survives. And it's not just about World War II. It's not even just about Hitler. It's about every story we've ever been told with certainty. Every headline that wrapped up a tragedy in a bow. Every documentary that made us feel like the chapter was closed when the ink had barely dried. Sometimes, Ohler told Joe, the most dangerous mystery isn't the one we haven't solved. It's the one we stopped looking at.
Joe leaned back, stared at the ceiling for a second, and then said it. Even if it's just 1% possible, that changes everything. That's the heart of this whole conversation. It's not about Hitler alive in Argentina. It's about the fact that we don't know for sure. And for a moment that defined the end of World War II, that's not just a missing detail. It's a missing cornerstone of modern history. If 1% of it is wrong, what does that do to the other 99? Norman Ohler didn't come to the Joe Rogan Experience with a conclusion. He came with a flashlight and a single mission: to shine it into the dark corners of a story we thought we already knew. He's not asking you to believe in ghosts or follow rabbit holes. He's asking you to do the one thing history depends on to stay honest. Stay curious. Because when we stop questioning, we stop evolving. And when the official story becomes more important than the truth, we lose something bigger than facts. We lose trust. Before the episode ended, Ohler looked down, then back up at Joe. His voice was low, steady, but a little different than when he started. Less like a journalist, more like a witness. Like someone who had carried something heavy for a long time. You know, he said, it's time we tell everything. Joe nodded. Nothing flashy. Just one man agreeing with another that sometimes unfinished stories need to be reopened. Not to rewrite them, but to make sure we got it right. The room stayed quiet for a beat longer than usual, because something had shifted, not just in the conversation, but in the audience watching it. People didn't leave that episode with a neat answer. They left with a mirror, a challenge, a door that might have been closed a little too soon. Maybe Hitler died in the bunker. Maybe the Soviets got it right. Maybe the official story is 100% true. But here's what Norman Ohler makes impossible to ignore. We don't know. We never really did. And that matters. Because if even one thread of that tapestry doesn't hold, how many others deserve a second look? What do you think? Did we rush to closure or bury the truth? Let us know in the comments. Stay curious. And never stop asking the hard questions. Because sometimes, the real danger isn't what we don't know. It's what we stopped caring enough to find out.